As Justin said, my name is Dan Hughes. I'm Director of Data and Information Products at RICS. I'm also leading a piece of work that looks at how technology is going to be changing the sector going forward. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I'm very keen to look at what's happening in the industry at the moment, what's going on now, also what might happen in the future, and potentially to answer Justin's last question about some top tips for QSs. Before I introduce the panel, I am really keen that this is interactive. So we've had a couple of questions come through the app. Please do log into that. Please do send the questions through, and they'll come up on my screen and I'll introduce them as we go. So to discuss this today, we've got a great panel for you. Firstly, we've got Tony Burton. Tony's a partner at Gardner Theobald and also Deputy Chairman at the Construction Industry Council. Next, we've got Rachel Walker, who's an Associate Director at Turner & Townsend, and also winner of the 2016 QS of the Year at the Women in Construction Awards. And finally, we have Martin Roberts, who's a partner at Pinsent Masons. So before we get into the panel discussion, Tony and Martin are just going to say a few words with some slides to set the scene. Martin's a co-author of Collaborative Construction, More Myth Than Reality. And I think looking at collaboration, and we've just heard all about culture, is a really important topic. So, Martin, over to you.
Another way. There we go. Well, good morning, everybody. Nice to see you. Our report was published last summer. It started from the assumption that new technologies require greater collaboration, and it started by identifying some of the key barriers that we felt there were to collaboration. No surprises, I think, to most of you, but just running through them very quickly. Inertia tends to result from the comfort of the familiar, always easier to resort to the tried and tested. Perception that collaboration is more costly, probably driven mostly by an assumption that collaboration is likely to take more time. Construction clients still driven by short-term goals and thinkings, lowest fees, lowest price, need to go out to competitive tender. Reluctance by procurers to engage in more collaborative processes because they feel a lack of control or a reduced control, especially, for example, with something like alliancing. An assumption as well that reduced control is a bad thing. Insufficient commercial incentive for industry professionals and contractors to change. Well, reduced fee certainty is probably at the heart of that. A worry that we won't be able to charge for the true value of the work, and a concern that alternative proposals that we might make will reduce our ability to win the work if the client wants the lowest price. Lack of training in the benefits of collaborative working techniques, inexperienced staff, and inadequate data. Professional bodies sometimes too slow to advocate and promote new approaches, adapting too slowly to the sort of things that Ian has been talking about. Absence of standard contracts and professional terms which help to make those changes and bring in collaborative cultures. Nearly all, for example, the contracts that we deal with which involve collaboration at the moment are bespoke, and clearly, obviously, a reliance on things like protocols aren't the complete answer. So what do we do? Having identified the barriers, we try to sort of identify some recommendations as to how we thought the industry needed to respond and change. And I've just selected a few which I think are particularly relevant to you today. Some, again, will be obvious to you, some I'm sure you'll be already thinking about. But continued BIM adoption, absolutely essential, but perhaps greater clarity as to how BIM's to be incorporated, greater attention to client requirements. Tinkering at the edges at the moment, BIM provisions perhaps not thought through, as much as they should be, and collaborative structures still relatively rare. The need to change attitudes, greater emphasis on team working. Professional bodies, I think, can help a lot with that. More education and training can help with that as well. Changing risk profiles. Risk profiles will encourage collaborative behaviour if there's reward for collaborative behaviour. Balance of risk and reward needs to change. And creating centres of excellence, knowledge for best practice in effective collaboration techniques. Just actually pooling and bringing together all the experience that there is out there at the moment. Here we go. Training I've mentioned already. Measuring project success differently. Looking much more at overall life cycle costs, not just outturn construction costs against budget, and talking to clients more about that. The old John Glenn quote, which many of you have heard before, the first astronaut to orbit the Earth, who said, "As I hurtle through space, one thought kept crossing my mind. Every part of this capsule was supplied by the lowest bidder." The evolution of the QS role to reflect that more collaborative culture as well, something that you're going to be talking about through the course of today. And incentivising the team and sharing risk and reward, I've mentioned already. So that was our first report, and we're now moving to look at some of the themes that emerged from our first report in a little bit more detail. And some of the working groups that we've got, who are drawn from the full gamut of the industry, have been coming up with some themes which I think are quite interesting. And I've just tried to select a few of those from which I thought might be relevant to you. The first thing, and I think the positive, is that the overwhelming view is that there is a real opportunity for the QS profession to conduct the orchestra. The profession is adaptable, it's adapted in the past, it can adapt in the future, but the skill base needs to evolve if you are to be the conductors of the orchestra. Cultural change is always going to be necessary. Ian's been speaking about that earlier. Before collaboration can be genuinely embraced, you've got to create the culture where people really believe that this is something that can happen. And the need to revalidate core competencies and skill sets to improve effectiveness. Old-style QSing will be replaced by technology. I think we all agree with that. But more varied and diverse skill sets are the future. But does your profession know enough about the other musicians in the orchestra, how they work? Is the training that you provide broad enough? Do you train people in project finance, in contractual issues, in structuring the team, in effective team working, in data management and interpretation? And is there more the profession can do in that regard? Centres of excellence, I've already spoken about, collating experience. Greater acceptance of BIM, especially in the private sector. Currently it's very patchy. Cross-discipline training and experience so that professionals can gain a wider perspective on the benefits of collaboration and understand more about everything that other people in the process do. And a greater onus on professionals to discuss collaborative options with clients right at the outset and to demonstrate their knowledge and the evidence of the benefits from the experience that they've gained. And I suppose, above all, courage to break away from traditional models of adversarial transaction management. And just leaving you with a few quotes from Mark Farmer in an article that he wrote soon after his report was published. You can read them for yourself, but I think the last one is key to this. The real benefits of BIM, in my opinion, will never be fully realised unless it is deployed as part of a fully collaborative organisational model. I agree with that, and I suspect a lot of you are here today because you do as well. Thank you very much. Martin,
thank you very much. Now Tony's going to say a few words about the future of the QS role. set the scene.
I'm going to go backwards first before I go forward, because I've been at this a long time. Let me find the right buttons to push on here, first of all. That's the right way around. Yeah. Am I aiming at something?
It's the other way.
The other way. Found it. So I have to go backwards to go forwards. Okay, so long have I been at it. I'm going to go back to the analogy that was used just a few minutes ago, space. When I was born, there were only two things flying around our planet, and they were both called Sputnik. And there it is. And in one slide, that is what's up there today. That's the measure of progress in one lifetime. And all of those things are doing something that affects us or are doing something for us. So an awful lot of stuff has gone up there in my lifetime. And in my professional career, that's nearly 40 years ago I started that, we were doing a lot of counting and measuring of things back then. I think when I arrived in the office, I brought the second piece of technology, other than the telephone to the office. It was called a calculator. And I've seen through my career the advent of a number of different things: the mobile phone, IBM PC, the fax machine, remember those things, through the internet, email, digital measurement, and BIM. And with each advancing technology, I seem to have heard a simultaneous sounding of the death knell of the quantity surveyor. Every single technological advancement said the QS is dead or dying. But guess what? We're still here. And what's happened during that time, and we've heard it from Ian, and I largely agree with what he said at the end of his talk to us, computers and technology have replaced some of those functions that we would have known as quantity surveying back at the turn of the preceding century, measurement and counting. And I think we're pretty much all okay with that, because it does free us to do those other things that Ian also talked about, the sort of client-facing relationship side of the business we do. And just perhaps one example of that, the way we value work on site still goes back to the 1830s. We're still waiting for stuff to be placed brick on brick and waiting for someone like me or you to turn up and count them before we can pay the guys that are actually building the thing that we want built. It's inevitable to me that technology will replace that function. It's inevitable. Not too long ago, it seemed particularly crazy to me, I can get this thing to work again, that we would be paying for stuff with our mobile phones. You know, it's not a long time ago that the mobile phone came in. In fact, it's less than 10 years since we had digital stuff, iPhones, in our pockets. So we've gone from credit cards through to apps on our phones in a relatively short space of time. And the same technology that's in our pockets means that we can now track just about anything we want to track anywhere in the world. So every civilian aircraft that's flying, I can see on my mobile phone. Every ship that's on the high seas, I can see on my mobile phone. I can tell you, if I bother to look, where my car is right now. And my wife can tell you where I am right now, down to about the square yard I'm standing in, she tells me. I can buy things like GPS trackers to go into my luggage for relatively inexpensive amounts of money now. We're talking 40, 50 pounds to do that. So why can't we tag some of the stuff that's coming into our sites? Why can't we tag chillers that are being delivered, or marble, or any other component that we're bringing to site to assemble? We can track anything, anywhere in the world. We can put geofences around it so we know where they are and when they move into and out of those zones. But we're moving beyond that. We're already talking about drone deliveries, robotic construction, augmented reality. Those things are here now, and we're just beginning to use them in the world that we all operate in. At a conference last year, I put that image on the wall. It had only just been launched in the autumn of last year. It's the smart hard hat. So on that visor of the hard hat, this was launched by a company called Dacry. The visor gives you a head-up display of the digital model, and through that you're seeing the reality of what's being built. And in that helmet there are two cameras that are recording everything you look at, and everybody on site has the same technology. So how's that going to affect things like electronic payment when we've got an electronic record of what's been physically built by the day? How does it affect snagging and quality control? All those things will come and be taken into that world of computing. What's actually concerning me is the increasing rate of change that these things are happening. That's the chart that shows the evolution of the iPhone from iPhone 1 in 2007 to the last iteration of the iPhone. I think it is actually an iPhone 7. I'm a couple behind that, I'm afraid. If you put the cursor line on that of the development of that product, you can see there's an increasing pace of the rollout of each generation. Technology is changing so fast that the product that we're all familiar with is being updated at an increasing rate. So we've gone from things in our pockets, we're now going to wearable technology, things that we have upon us, watches and smart things. And what is coming next? Well, wait for it, folks, because it's implantable technology. Smart tattoos that you can wear. So that you won't be carrying passports in the near future. Your tattoo will let you into border control at Heathrow. That technology is here, and it will only increase. There are some scary estimates that say that about half of us will lose our jobs in the next 30 years due to this pace of change. So should we quantity surveyors be afraid? Well, I found a BBC website. It was called Will a Robot Take My Job? And I was really pleased to find out that quantity surveyors were 323rd out of 366, with only a 3% risk of robots taking our job. Estimators and valuers, the more technological end of the game, were at 51% and 96% respectively. So we're in a group of people where we are using our creative thoughts. So the reason we're not, I think, at risk, and Ian confirms this, is that if the wall, those screens, are everything that we as quantity surveyors do, then I've deliberately chosen the postage stamp there, the penny black. That's the stuff that's going to get replaced. That's the measuring and the counting. The commoditised bit is the stamp, the relationship bit is the rest of the wall. That's where we're going to be. So technology is coming at us, it's coming at us at an increasing pace. But I think if we understand it, we should then embrace it. Thank you.
Great, so thank you very much indeed. Two very interesting discussions just as a backdrop to this wider discussion. So Rachel, we've not heard from you. Maybe I could start with you. Could you say a few words about your role, what do you do at your company, and also what you're seeing happening in the industry at the moment?
Yep, no problem. Rachel from Turner & Townsend. I'm one of the associate directors in the Leeds office, taking a lead in the residential sector for the commercial team in the office, doing quite a lot of work with the same client at the moment. So obviously the building relationships and collaboration is a big part of that for repeat business. In terms of in the industry at the moment, I think we have a number of challenges. I think we've talked about the collaboration element of those challenges that we need to address, but also looking at how we can work with the groups as designers, contractors, clients all together, and also the various different age groups and experiences throughout people's careers, and trying to integrate some of the younger and the elder, more experienced people to work alongside together to integrate with the new technologies.
Great. Okay, so can I start off with asking a question? So Tony, you mentioned some fantastic things there about the Dacry smart helmet, which I've tried, and it's absolutely brilliant. Future tattoos, which is going to be digital. On the flip side of that, we also hear a lot about the pace of change and the adoption of technology, something like BIM that's going on. How do we bridge that gap as an industry between the very slow adoption of some technologies, but also the incredible pace of what's going on and what's coming at us?
I think the key to it is being fleet of foot. It's Ian's diagram about being able to move quickly in that world. I mean, technology doesn't gradually leach into our businesses. You suddenly wake up one morning and find there's a PC on your desk, and then you come in and I've got 2 screens today. And actually, we're pretty good. You know, most professionals are pretty bright and pretty adaptable. And those that want to and are ready to accept that technological advancement embrace it pretty quickly, actually. So the learning curve is perhaps not as great as we might expect once it hits our desk. And it's whilst it's out there and we're talking about it. You know, I talk about smart tattoos. They're going to come. But I don't know what they look like, and I don't know what it'll feel like to have one, and can I take it off at night? I've no idea. But once that technology reaches a point where it's at our desk and we are using it, I think we're pretty quick to embrace that change.
Great. And Martin, this is possibly a dangerous question for me to ask, but I was struck by something in there you said about professional bodies. You mentioned them a couple of times. So one was that they're typically quite slow to move things forward and to adapt to new ways of doing it, but also that they've got quite a big role in taking things forward. So from your point of view, professional bodies representing the wider industry, what's your role, do you think, that they need to play?
Well, I do think that they're at the forefront of training and development of talent, and I think if young quantity surveyors, for example, coming through now into the industry are going to be, as they must be, adopting the technologies and the techniques that we've been talking about, the vital thing is to make sure that their training and education equips them to do that. Because, as I said in some of my remarks, I think there's a unique opportunity for QSs to lead the way in this area, because very often it's your profession, they're right at the front end of projects. Advising the clients right at the outset. Now, obviously, some clients are going to come to you and with fully formed views as to the way in which they wish to progress with the project, but very often they're not, and they're going to be looking to you for your advice. If your younger professional members have got a breadth of background and experience and training in how the whole projects construction market works and how the structures can be developed to suit the client's needs and what the client might be looking for in the long term, I think that that's going to be absolutely vital, because it's going to put you in pole position to be very much the trusted advisor that you have been in the past and are at the moment, but will you be in the future unless your profession adapts. And it's very much the same in my profession. Our professional bodies are unbelievably slow to change, and training and education at the moment is right at the forefront of what we're doing in the legal profession, and there's just been a huge review as to how it needs to change to equip lawyers for the future. I'm sure it's happening in your profession. I don't know enough about it, but it seems to me absolutely fundamental.
It is happening in our profession, and one good example, I think, is the work that's been done by both RICS's professional body, the academic world and industry to develop the Trailblazer apprenticeship programs. Now, I describe that to Sean Tompkins as not just moving a mountain, but collectively moving the Himalayas, and to achieve what we've done there. So that's created a pathway into the profession for people at the age of 16 and 18 who have grown up and inhabited from birth a digital world. They think differently. I've got a 16-year-old apprentice working for me who leaves the rest of us for dead when it comes to working in a digital environment, because that's what he's done all of his life. So providing we've got the doors open to enable that talent to come in, and we can find a way of attracting more of it, big problem there, maybe talk about that a little later, then we're going to get the skills we need. And the other challenge I think we've got is actually quantity surveyors are quite good at manipulating data. And the digital world is all about data. So our buildings are going to get increasingly smarter. They're going to be providing more data to us. Crossrail is literally bristling with sensors. Who's going to inhabit the space that manages the data that our buildings are now producing? And if it's not the quantity surveyor, then it'll be his profession, or it'll be EY or something like that. So we should grab that space, in my view.
That's great. So you mentioned data, which has come up a few times. There's a question that's come in here, which is a really good one, around how has cost data been used in the projects, and how has it changed in the last decade? and how's it going to change the influences, the working practices going forward? So Rachel, do you have any views on how it's changed and how it's used?
I think with the cost data that I think you've mentioned it previously, haven't you, about our changing role and the fact that the traditional QS type services of bills of quantities and measurement with scale rulers is diminishing now, and data and technology is where we can lead forward and become leaders in that field. I think we work more collaboratively now than we have done in the past 10 years in terms of bringing in data from various different sectors, working together as companies, working together with various contractors. I know we send out surveys regularly to ask contractors to input into where they are with their tenders, looking at tender returns from other businesses and using that to collectively pull together data that we can use to put cost plans together, to look at alternative solutions for clients as a suggestion that may be a more cost efficient way of doing it, because we've got that data all in software, and a lot of it is in software that's very easy for you to go into to pick out those elements that you want to try and help the client to find a more efficient way of doing his building and construction, and challenging contractors to some extent. Apologies if there are anybody sat here from a contractor, where they are suggesting a solution or a product, and having that knowledge to be able to challenge why they're changing the product and making sure it's the most value for the client, but also making sure that we're not down specking. So I think a lot of the data that we're getting back now, and also we're working a lot closer with the supply chain than we have done previously, to drive further data. And I think that's probably where we've changed, is that more collaboration with the various different elements of people that can help you with putting together that data to use for the client's benefit, and also your own, making sure that you're as robust as possible when you're advising the client.
I would say also it's the speed we can access that data. And we've all had, as professionals, data for, what sets a profession apart is the access to the body of knowledge that we've collectively got. But we can access that now in real time. So in a conversation I was having yesterday with a client on the other side of the world, I was using real-time data on my screen in that conversation. I couldn't have done that 10 years ago. We just didn't have the technology to be able to respond that quickly.
And I think this goes to life cycle costs, because the old statistic that I'm sure we all know, if you take 100% of a cost, the cost of both constructing and managing a built asset over its design lifetime, only 20% of that relates to the construction phase. So 80% relates to the remaining 40, 50, 60 years of its lifespan. But the data we now have available through smart technology is enabling us to have access to how much that building is costing to run, the operation and maintenance of it, and that's becoming much, much more sophisticated. And that's actually enabling attention to be turned not just to that 20%, but to the 80%, and that's influencing clients. And someone said to me recently, why is it, why is BIM going to be of interest to a spec developer who's just sticking up a commercial office building in London and then unloading it to some German investment trust? And I think the answer is that up to now it probably hasn't been, because providing he can get a tenant into the building and get out and get his investment out and his profit, he's not going to be too worried about the long-term operational and maintenance cost of that building. But as the data starts to emerge, and as the access to the data, as Rachel has said, becomes much easier, then the rental value of that building is going to be influenced by its operation and maintenance cost. And therefore the market will respond to that, and that developer is just not going to be able to operate in the same way as he has in the past, and he's going to be looking much, much longer in terms of the financial analysis of his building.
In fact, the market's already responding. It already has responded, because at rent reviews now, what's a quantity surveyor doing in a rent review, you might say? Well, we're providing data, and that data that's being collected from those buildings is adding value to that process. So we're now able to look at the difference in running costs between a nice, shiny, new, airtight building and one that was built some years ago under a different set of codes that is tired and wheezy. And in a rent review world, it's all in perfect condition, the hypothetical world of rent review, but one costs a lot more to run than the other, and that's influencing the headline rent, and that's going to influence the thought of those developers going forward, for sure.
Okay, great. So we've got some really good questions coming in, so I want to try and pick up on some of these. One of them is really picking up on speed. So I saw recently, so in this conversation we spoke about speed of access of data, speed of construction on site. I saw an example of a 57-story building recently in China that was built from the ground up in 19 days. And this is picking up on the issue about speed. How can we make sure that there's the availability of resources and particularly have the cost confidence and assurance around that? And more generally, how do you think the speed, which is clearly having some benefits, but it's going to bring some challenges as well, how do we deal with those? Tony, perhaps?
I was rather hoping Rachel would say that first. There's a whole raft of stuff going through my head on that. I mean, 19 days is pretty ambitious. I've done buildings in concrete with four-day floor cycles, which were challenging, to the extent that the guys pouring the concrete were running out of cash. So we were paying them directly, paying the labour force directly to keep that thing going. But it is going to be a problem. We're going to see a shift from on-site construction to perhaps on-site assembly. We're going to see a shift to factory-based production. And there are different skills and there are different metrics that we need to acquire to be able to do that. The pace of construction is going to increase. I had a quote, and I've used it myself many times. Our level of productivity and the way we are building most of our buildings is no different from the way the Romans used to build theirs. We're still putting a lot of brick on brick and tiles on the roof. And that will change dramatically with the technology that's now available to us.
Great. Rachel?
I assume the design was completed by the time you started on site.
You should see the snagging list.
I think, certainly with private developers and the ones that I'm working with, everything is about speed now, and it's not just in terms of the construction. But obviously with the new technologies we've got, once you've got your design progressing, using tools like BIM for clash detection will help with speeding up on-site construction. I think you then have to look at the different types of build. I'm assuming that was some sort of open plan office, not a residential scheme, where, as you said, snagging and quality is particularly important. I think I was reading somewhere last year or so where they're building out of bamboo in Asia, so that could have been a bamboo building. Whether it's tasted up, I don't know. But I don't think I'll ever work on a project that's built in 19 days. I think that's far beyond us in this country. I think obviously a lot of collaboration's required, but clients are now wanting to speed up the process. We're needing to be on site of a project that's just completely changed, whether it's going to go private or rental, and that's got no difference in change on start on site, which is in 2-3 months. So in terms of looking at clients' needs, it's not just the construction. I find that actually it's the upfront element where they're wanting to speed the process up, and that can be at times quite dangerous because it reduces your ability to do up-to-date more market testing. It reduces your ability to ensure that the design is as coordinated and as robust as it possibly can. In terms of construction, I think all of these upfront technologies that we are bringing forward now and working collaboratively can potentially reduce construction times, and that will be mainly because contractors will look to reduce their risk programme and their float, as we say, in the programmes that they are going to site with. So that's where I think we can use the technologies to reduce programmes on site is by making sure that the contractors have got enough confidence in the design that they are going to be able to move forward without having to stop and redesign with the team that they're working with.
And we're already seeing technology make a big difference in the speed of construction. So 3D printed houses in China, you've all seen the films, no doubt, of those. One printer turning out something like 10 or 20 units a day, just printing houses. And they're printing them at a cost of something like $5,000 a unit. That's going to change the housing world in parts of the world, but what's the skill set that we have to cost a building that's delivered like that? What are the legal frameworks that go around the design and production of that? You know, we're catching up with where technology is beginning to leave us behind, both in terms of the knowledge that we need to advise on that, and the framework to procure and deliver those things properly. Not just the $5,000 unit, but you've got to finish that and place it.
Yeah, Martin, any views on the speed and the risk, and in particular the legal side of things?
Collaboration, for me. I'm not convinced that collaboration is more costly. I think the evidence will start to become more available that collaboration can save costs and save time. I do think, I mentioned it in my slides, that one of the barriers to collaboration is that people think it's more expensive. Involving more people, more meetings, more discussions, more communication is more expensive. They worry about fee levels, they worry about whether the process, which is unfamiliar, is going to cost more than the tried and tested. But I think as more and more evidence emerges, and more data is collected, and we set up these centres of excellence, which will be a repository for that information, people will realise that actually you can save time, and saving time means saving money.
Great. So I have got a good question here, which I will read out verbatim in a second, but it's a general context about technology is replacing parts of our roles. I think we heard in the two presentations earlier, it's going to be changing the role that we do, conducting the orchestra. The postage stamp isn't everything by any stretch. So I just wanted to talk and get your views on, in a bit more detail, about what parts of the role will be changing and what should people do about it. And the question that's really prompted this is, and I'm just reading this verbatim, if tech perfects the construction process, can we dispense with construction lawyers? Martin, maybe I could...
What would I say? I say to that, no. I would say no to that, because I think it's contracts drive behaviours, and they always will. You have to, when you've agreed a structure for a project, you need to encapsulate that in documents which explain the obligations and responsibilities that each member of the team have, and how they're to collaborate, how they're to work together. And you need to set out the risks that they take and the rewards that they will share. And sharing risks and rewards, for me, is a key part of collaboration. And I think you will need to document that. Now, I do think that process can be made simpler and easier with greater standardization of forms of professional engagement, and with construction contracts, with alliancing agreements, and with protocols. And that should happen and will happen. And there are a number of organisations working on that at the moment. But I think that sadly for those in the room, I think there will always be a need for advice. Although I think that the legal world is changing in exactly the same way as your world. And what Ian was saying earlier on about the fact that the advisory side, the basics, the technology side can be dealt with by artificial intelligence and machines as they develop. But the advisory, the experience side, the engineering of the information and the data will still require those of us in this room, and in my profession, I think that there will still be a need for lawyers.
Rachel, any views on that? And in particular, how do we become, or QSs become, the conductor of the orchestra and learn the other skills and get the breadth that we've heard about?
I think some of the changing ways that we've been developing, certainly since I started 17 years ago, is that you need to attract people to come into your sector, otherwise it dies out because nobody's interested in joining. So probably shouldn't say this, but QSing as a core QS skills are quite boring. And so apologies for everybody who does like doing bills of quantities.
Say it again, because we all believe you.
So to attract younger people into the profession, we've had to change, we've had to develop the role. One of the things that I enjoy most about my job is not sat cost planning, not sat churning through quotes, etc. It's about the challenges of being part of a team that take a building to site. And certainly in the north, we have probably different challenges to London, because you're very built up, so your challenges on site are very different to ours. But we are left with a lot of brownfield sites, because keeping the north green and open, and which is the best thing to do, we have to develop brownfield sites. And they come with a lot of contamination, requirement of remediation. So we have a lot of challenges in the north on budget. So in terms of our changing role and if we're going to be needed, etc., of course we are, because data and digitalisation is not going to be able to help produce a design and a development that will achieve a client's budget, or take into account all of the remediation that's required on site. I once worked on a project down in Norfolk that was that had £10 million worth of remediation strategy undertaken, and it was still one of the most contaminated sites in the UK. It had a live asbestos water main pipe running through it, but to regenerate that particular area, the local council were building housing on this highly contaminated site with a budget of around 21 million and a design that was 25. Now, using as much digitalisation as you want is not going to get that budget down. Challenging design teams, working together with design teams, being the client's advisor from the start is all of the things that I really enjoy about my job. In terms of the noise, I think we're quite a long way off that, because ultimately, from your point of view, you need to have contracts in place in case there is a dispute, because we are still in an industry where we come across those. And I don't think that as an industry with different sections of the teams, we're collaborative enough at the moment, and there is still, for some reason, a little of distrust, I think, in some of the other services of everybody else. And I think until we've got that sort of nailed, I don't think we will lose the noise. But I do think that's a big part of how we will get there.
I'm going to disagree with Martin. I'd like to think that the world we're talking about today will see not the death of, but less of, the contentious lawyer. So I'm not disagreeing with the front end. I think there is a need for good, sound legal advice in the world we inhabit, and to document the deals that are done in the contracts, particularly more complex contracts are involved with. But if we're building our buildings digitally, if we're thinking them through in a digital environment before we physically create them, then the argument is those challenges that cause dispute in contracts have all been ironed out. So I'd like to see less of the contentious lawyer in that world, and I think it should actually produce that, Martin, I think.
No, I would absolutely agree with that. I think that collaborative contracts will result in fewer disputes. I still think that there's a role for lawyers, especially in the advisory side, especially in the formation side, the project formation, the team establishment, and the risk and reward profile, the alliancing agreements. I do think that that's going to be necessary, will always be necessary, but I do agree with you, Tony, that I do think more collaborative behaviour and more collaborative team working, effective team working, will reduce disputes, especially the sorts of disputes that we see time and time again at the moment on measurement, on defects, the sort of things that are going to adjudication day in, day out. I think that will significantly reduce.
Okay, great. So I wanted to pick up on another point that was mentioned earlier. Tony, I think you specifically mentioned it, so if I could start with you. But we've heard about the new skills, we've heard about the changing generations and how we work together. One of the big challenges, I think, for the industry is around attracting people into the industry in its first place. So maybe you could give a view on how we're doing with that, but also what we need to do to make that a better process.
Can I set some context for it?
Absolutely.
Just to give you an idea of how big this problem is. We've currently got a piece of work I'm doing elsewhere that because of an election I'm not allowed to mention, but there are something like 125,000 European migrants in the construction industry in the UK. Most of them are in London. If we go onto a site here, we'll see 60 or 70% European labour. In Leeds, it'll be probably single figures, but not double figure percentages. And that 125,000, if you put it into the context of the total workforce in construction, again, depending on how you measure it, it's around 3 million. It doesn't sound a big number. We could afford possibly to let 125,000 European workers who are here for economic reasons, actually no other reason than that, go and earn their euro somewhere else. But put it in context, 125,000 is 10 times the supply chain for Crossrail. It's twice the supply chain of the Olympic Park, 3 times Terminal 5. That's what we're talking about. And then to further compound that, if Mark Farmer's right on his figures, the same number, 125,000, are retiring or leaving the industry every year. So 10 Crossrails every year leaving us. By the time we leave the EU, 125 times 3, we're all quantity surveyors, we can do the numbers. It's a lot of labour that's gone from the industry, and we are not replacing it fast enough. We don't have enough places available on cognate courses. Even if we double that through non-cognate courses, we can't replace the skills that we're losing. We just can't do it. So we have got to attract people in, and we've got to find different ways, like the apprenticeship route, of attracting and retaining people within this. We lose an awful lot of people mid-career. They happen to be mainly women, but we've got to work better at that. We've got to work better at providing the phrases to kids at school that construction is a great place to work, and the professions in the built environment are great jobs to have. And we're talking today about some whiz-bang techie tools. These kids love that. You tell them we're building buildings using robots, using digital skills. It's a very different game to the world of construction that they know. Where are we on the chart of changing that image? Probably a bit beyond Model T, but not far above that, I would say. There's a heck of a long way to go to be able to walk into a school and ask a child in a classroom to name a profession that includes a built environment. They might get today to architecture, they might get to engineering, but they don't mean engineering in terms of construction. We've got a long way to go.
And any views on what it is that we need to be doing? Because this has been the problem that's been recognised for a while. What else do we need to be doing?
The best summary I heard of what the problem is was actually from a head teacher, and it was actually an event hosted by the RICS, as it happens, but a bunch of head teachers, and one of them said, we are very good at what we do, we teach, but the thing we do that you guys don't appreciate is we're also talent spotters. And the problem we have is we don't know what talent you guys need, so we don't know how to spot it. So it's about getting the message into the heads of the teachers and the parents and the children. And we're all doing that individually. I'm sure each of our businesses is playing our part in doing that. Our professional body is doing it. But we've got to get that to the collective, where we're all doing it together to make that seismic shift, I think.
Rachel?
No, I agree with you on that. I think it's about using the younger talent that we've got now to get out there into those schools and colleges, speak to the students that are looking at choosing what career paths they want to do, and showing them the more interesting side of our profession, to be honest, because people kind of fall into quantity surveying, and I'm an example of that. It wasn't something I set out to do. I wanted to be a lawyer, decided that it was too much like hard work, so I became a QS with the opportunity to work from within the legal side of that profession, and I have done a little bit of working with some of our contract advisory service teams. So I think it's about showing them the opportunities as well. I mean, we can, if you've got the ambition to work abroad, there are many of us that we're global, so you've got that opportunity to work abroad. I think it's showing all the positive sides of the industry that we can put forward. I do also think we have a little bit of a risk at the moment with the digital era, because everything's digital. You know, I've got a Fitbit that tells me I've not moved for the last 20 minutes, so things are telling you've got to start moving, so everything is going digital. I have concerns that we still need to be showing the newer generation that you do still have to be thinking with your own brain and your own mind and checking what's coming out of that data, because it's only as good as what's been inputted. I had a situation when we first started playing around with BIM, and somebody was measuring a concrete frame. It's a 34-storey tower, 875 square metres of floor plate on each floor, and there was 39 metre cubes of concrete. You know, they thought that was okay. They didn't question it, and I think that is something that the younger generation need to learn from some of the more experienced. And I have seen it recently within the office where some of the older guys are working closely now, finally embracing the need to bring in technology, and the younger guys are teaching them the technology element of the role, but also they're now looking at their experience and seeing that they need to develop some of the older generation skills that actually universities aren't giving them anymore. So I think we've got quite a challenge on attracting new members of to the industry. In terms of females, I think there's a lot of reasons why females sometimes change career path, and I do think we need to work on that to some extent as to why that's happening.
The diversity piece is very, very interesting, actually. If you fell into quantity surveying, I always wanted to be a quantity surveyor. Always wanted to be a quantity surveyor. But because I had a relative who was a quantity surveyor and had a very nice life on the island of Jersey, it was a very distorted view of quantity surveying, I have to say. But for most of my early career, the first wave of degree holding quantity surveyors coming into the profession, that cognate degree course was white male with a relative who happened to be somewhere connected with the industry. The non-cognate route has without a doubt opened a doorway through which more women are coming, and a wider and broader talent pool is coming through that. My observation, it's a very limited one because it's not been running very long, but of the apprenticeship route, we're seeing a much more genuine representation of the cross-section of society coming through that door. So I've got kids in the office that would not have been contemplating a career in the built environment.
It's funny because that's where mine came from, through a relative. Yeah. I think my father has his own business, and he was hoping that I would do the course and then go and work with him, which I never have done. But so that is, you know, it usually is through knowing somebody else a lot of the time.
I made a very dreadful mistake once when I was making a public presentation. I better not repeat what I said, but the gist of what I wanted to say was that if we can attract the girls at school into our profession, the boys will certainly have been grabbed. What I actually said was we need to get our hands on 14-year-old girls in school. But the sentiment was the former rather than the latter. And I still think that's right. I think if we can pitch our message so that those 14-year-old girls who are making their career choices about GCSEs and A-levels are thinking about construction, then we've got the message into that whole classroom. You know, there are still too many schools saying to too many girls at school, construction's not for you, dear. And it couldn't be further from the truth, actually.
Okay, great. So we've got 4 or 5 minutes left, so we'll wrap up. There have been lots of questions, and I'm sorry that I'm not going to get through all of them. But there is a theme to a lot of these around data, so maybe we could just go for a very quick-fire data round. And maybe start, Martin, with you. One of the things here is the biggest challenge, or the question is the biggest challenge and threat to collaboration is IP.
I think the IP issues can be dealt with. It is a challenge. They're not entirely resolved yet. I think that the latest version of the BIM protocol deals a little bit more in a little bit more detail with the IP issues, but I think that they can be dealt with. I think data is the key to managing the data. Is the key for the future. I agree with the view that data management is going to be a major challenge for the industry. I gather that data managers are some of the most prized people in the country at the moment, and the salaries that they can command are astronomical, and it doesn't surprise me because I think there's a shortage of them, and I think we're still getting to grips with those issues. But I think that the availability of the data, the smart technology, the smart buildings, smart cities that we're starting to see emerge, yes, they present a data management challenge, but yes, they present also a really exciting challenge and new ways of developing and monitoring and valuing what this industry does.
Great. So Rachel, there's a lot of data questions that come in. So cybersecurity is one of the issues about how do we collect data, how do we manage the data that's coming in from all the sensors, how do we make sure that we've got the right skills about data. If there's one thing that you recommended to people to go out and do to try and start learning about this, have you got any thoughts?
In terms of data collection or usage?
Well, being ready for the technology that's coming.
I think we're already looking towards being ready for that. I know we're certainly, and lots of practices are setting up centres for excellence for BIM. We're already there with that. That's already set up and ready, and it's running and working. We have each of our officers has experts, not experts, they're sort of champions of BIM in every office. We have champions of Costex because that's coming along. So you've always got access to somebody who knows the processes already, who knows how to use that data. We have data analysts employed by the practice to collate all the data that we collect. But I think it's all still about the collaboration. The data analysts can only analyse what we can give them. And it's about using the tools of contractors and other practices and other clients' data and collating all that together, ready for moving forward. I know that in terms of cost planning and the digital usage that we have of Costex, you do all sorts of things in Costex. At the moment, I don't think we're quite ready to be producing reports for clients straight out of Costex, and I think there's still a lot of development needed to do that. So you've still got to take what's in Costex and put it in a presentation form, because I don't think those sorts of systems are there yet. And ultimately, we still have data, software goes down, freezes, shuts, if you have a power cut. All these things I don't think we're thinking about yet. But for security purposes, I'm probably not expert enough in IT systems, to be honest. I'm sort of in that middle period of, I started at university where we were more hands-on, less technology, finishing university where we were more technology, and then as it's developed over time. So I'm sort of in that middle bracket, I think. But it's just about being open and having an open mind that when we come across something that we have the ability to go out and source how we're going to deal with it. Really.
Great. Yeah. Tony, final last word to you. One thing that you'd recommend people to do to go out and prepare for what's coming, the skills?
Gosh, that's a really interesting one. Part of the question is, what are the skills we need to prepare for that? The preparation for me...
Justin's waving me, so I don't have time for that one.
Sorry. The preparation that we need is to have the doorways open to enable the skills that we need in the future to walk through and into the office, into the workplace. I don't know what those skills will be. 10 years ago, we had iPhone 1 launched. 10 years on from now, I don't know what we're going to be using, but it's going to be much more powerful than the iPhone. So what are the skills we need for the buildings we're going to be assembling on site, building in factories? It'll change in very small segments. And the key for me is to make sure we've got professions that can attract those skills and have the doorways through which they can gain a professional qualification.
Excellent, thank you. So just before I say thank you to the panel, a shameless plug from my point of view, there is a RICS product stand in the corner, and on that we have a survey which is about the future of the QS. So if you're able to fill that out, it'd be great to get some data on that. And then the last thing for me is just to thank the panel. So Tony, Martin and Rachel, thank you very much for your time. Please join me in a round of applause.